And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Guillaume of Scoop.it, the founder and CEO of Scoop.it, and he's going to talk about lean marketing and lean content strategy.
Thank you, Susan. Good night, everybody. So let me start by asking you a question. So how many in the room are marketers? Okay. How many in the room are content marketers? How about social media? A bit of both? Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to talk about what we learned. We've been around for 5 years, and I'm going to talk about what we learned and what we developed as a methodology for content marketing return on investment that we call lean content marketing. So I'm going to try to make that super actionable, and my goal tonight is that you take away with something that you want to try, that you want to experiment with tomorrow or next week. So a bit about me and Scoop.it. I don't know, do all of you know Scoop.it? Some of you? Who knows Scoop.it? Okay, so we've been around for a bit more than, it's going to be 5 years in November. And we've been known for our content curation service, which is a freemium product that anybody can try. We have 3 million users of that product. More recently, we developed an enterprise version of which is a content marketing software platform. A bit about me, I'm a serial entrepreneur. Scoop.it is my third company. I'm French, as you can tell by my accent and my first name. And unlike you, I'm not a marketer originally, so marketing was an obscure art for me, and I'm an engineer by training. So a lot of the things that we learn are things that I experimented with, and things that I felt were worth sharing. So with that, I want to start by painting a little picture of what we've been seeing happening over the last 5 years since we started. 5 years ago, we started Scoop.it because we felt content was an opportunity in marketing. But in 5 years, it transformed into an obligation. And content can be used for all those different things which are marketing related, from generating traffic, generating leads, engaging a community, nurturing prospects, brand awareness. And on the right side, you have a graph from the Content Marketing Institute that shows that content is really used for all those activities. So it's all good, right? Well, not really. This is, over the last 12, 18 months, we've been starting to hear a lot of, negative vibes around content marketing. Mark Schaefer started to talk about content shock. Who's heard of content shock? Okay, so we've had this post by Buffer, who's like a great example of content shock, that said they lost half of their social referrals in 12 months. We've had Velocity partners talk about, hey, we are going to run the risk of having a deluge of crap content. And my most successful blog post to date is a blog post that I wrote, which was social media publishing is dead. And the thing that we never heard is this. Absolutely no one said it's too easy, and yeah, creating viral content, that's what I do during my breakfast. So there's a question mark as an industry that that there's something we should wonder about. Is it really working? And the data behind that captures this. Every year the Content Marketing Institute publishes a benchmark on the state of content marketing, and they're super optimistic about it. Talk about seeing the glass half full. They're saying 30% of marketers say they're efficient with content marketing, which is, of course, another way of saying 70% are not, which I think is a problem. So why is that? So I want to go quickly through the cause, and then, more importantly, I want to share with you some of the things we've observed that worked, from doing research with, the hundreds, thousands of marketers who use our free or premium versions. But I want to go through the analysis of why we saw this was happening. So first, we all see that. It's about fresh quality content. But fresh is important. And I like fresh tomatoes. So nobody likes rotten tomatoes. And, and Google and Facebook are now structured to prioritize fresh content. If you've done that beautiful, amazing piece of content that ranked #1 in Google 12 months ago, if you didn't do anything about it, chances are it's not #1 anymore. So there's this freshness and quality, and I'll talk more about that in a second. And of course, the thing is, it's hard, time-consuming, costly to create content, and it's not just a time versus cost trade-off. Content is actually very hard to outsource. It's actually very hard to tell someone and say, "Hey, write a blog post about this." It's all very subjective, and it's hard to brief people to create good content. Content distribution is becoming more and more complex because there are more ways to distribute content. But more importantly, if you look at most of those logos out there have an ad-funded business model. So what they're doing is pay for play. So they have a natural incentive to make it hard for you to get organic reach. And we've all seen that organic reach on Facebook pages has been declining. So I'll talk more about that, but the consequence of that, and that's a study by our friends at BuzzSumo. I don't know if you read that post, but they looked at a lot of content, and they realized that 50% of content, so half of the content out there, and they're looking at blog content, so it might be a little different for videos and multimedia content, but half of blog articles get 8 shares or less. In other words, nothing. It means they only shared it. I mean, the guys who created shared them, and that's it. So the other part of this is it's getting increasingly complex to understand what works and what doesn't. So it's not that it's a simple problem that has a simple cause. It's not that we see marketers always failing with the same thing. There can be multiple things. There are many moving parts in content marketing. And for them, there's a lot of lack of performance metrics, performance measurement systems. So there's another aspect of that. So, like I said, I'm not a marketer originally, so I don't like, even though I'm an engineer, I don't like complicated stuff. So I like to simplify. So when I started to look at all those problems, I said, okay, what is content marketing and how can we simplify that? How can we create a methodology where people who don't have a lot of resources, for those who don't know us, our sweet spot is we sell to small marketing teams. So people who don't have a lot of resources, people who can't tell, Ogilvy, here's $1 million, go fix content marketing for me. So I wanted to go back to the basics and really understand, what would it take to get content marketing success? And so my definition of content marketing, which I don't claim is unique or original, but which really is down to earth, content marketing is publishing and distributing content that drives people to take action. If you don't get that drives people to take action, you're doing content. You might be a writer, you might be a movie producer, you're doing art, you're not doing marketing. And if you're just trying to get people to take action, you're doing marketing, but not content marketing. It's really a combination of those things which is important. And so what this means is, it's all about 2 things, really. Content production and content impact. And content production means you need to produce enough, and we'll discuss what enough is, enough relevant quality content for your specific target audience. But if you do that and you don't get the impact you want, you've achieved nothing. So there's a distribution angle to this, and it needs to be as efficient as possible, which means you need to be able to define what efficient is. So you need to be able to measure. And again, I'm just, not pretending I'm inventing something crazy, but I'm just trying to be analyzing what it means. And so to make that super simple, what we tell to people who come to us, we tell them content marketing success is about getting more/better content, and whether you need more or better depends, and we'll go into that. But that's only one part of the question, of the aspect. You also need to get more from your content. Whatever distribution you get, you should try to get more distribution, all other things being equal. If you're doing 2 great blog posts a week, you should try to focus on strategy that help you get more from those 2 blog posts a week. And so that's what I want to share with you now is I want to go into different things, but I want to share with you actionable things that can touch on those 2 things, on those 2 aspects: more, better content, and more from your content. So the first thing is, there's been a lot of debate about, do you need more or better content? And I told you I'm an engineer by training. My first job was to be actually an industrial engineer. So I was in a manufacturing facility, and there's a tendency of people to think that you either have to choose between quantity or quality. And what I learned being an industrial engineer is that good companies who are good at manufacturing actually do both. And when you are not controlling your manufacturing process, you suck at raising the volumes, and you have a lot of defects, a lot of problems. So those are graphs from HubSpot, and they show that actually quantity matters. Those are, you may not, whether you're for or a nonprofit, you might measure performance different ways, but conversions are a really interesting way to measure whether people are taking action after they read your content. Do they sign up to your email address, to your email list? Do they download some gated contents? So that measures lead generation and traffic, and you can see that the higher number of monthly blog posts you have, the more likely you are to get traffic and leads. And that's from studying thousands of blogs. So there's really a clear interest to do a lot of volume. But the interesting part from a qualitative standpoint is to listen to that guy. I don't know if you guys know Marcus Sheridan? Have you read some of his content? I really recommend his blog. You can Google him, The Sales Lion. Used to be a guy who sold pools on the East Coast right after the 2008 crisis. And the only way he could survive was by doing content marketing. So he started to learn content marketing. And I love his quotes because he said that some okay content is going to beat content that never gets published, or awesome content that never gets published all the time. And he also captures what I meant by content is a production process. It's a production cycle, and you have to learn it. And the way to learn it is practice it. If you're spending 3 months trying to create that beautiful, Pulitzer Prize winning blog post, you're not going to learn from your mistakes. So the way to get great content is to produce average content and then improve. Okay, so quality and quantity, let's get both. So now, how do you get better content? The first thing is, that a lot of people will say is, it's all about the strategy. And strategy sounds like a very impressive word to some people, and to me, sometimes it sounds very bullshit. Okay, you got to figure out a great strategy. So in order to simplify strategy, I want to leave you with one thing. To me, the most important thing in terms of strategy is to answer your audience's question. If there's one thing you need to get right is, what do people expect? What are the questions they have? What are the questions they're asking themselves before they take the action I want them to take? Whether it's donating, whether it's buying a product, whether it's joining, becoming a member of something, they have questions. And you can brainstorm with your team, you can ask them, what were the questions you had? And answering those questions is a great strategy because you'll get them to find answers from you instead of your competitors or independent sources. And because they'll get answers from you, they'll start to trust you, and you'll create a relationship online with them. And that's by Barry Feldman, by the way, who's also a great blogger on content marketing. The other aspect to create better content, which is more like in the execution part, is don't think you create content in a vacuum. Nobody does, not even the great writers. Nobody ever created art in a vacuum or content. So research is extremely important. You might not think of other bloggers as competitors, and they might not be your direct competitors in a business sense, but from an intentions perspective, your content will compete with a lot of different content. So you need to study them. You need to research. You need to find out, for instance, what is getting shared on the keywords you wanna write about. You need to maybe discover new keywords they're using that you're not using. You might think that you might be describing the problem saying it's that and that, but people think of it of this and that. So you might need to discover new keywords to explain that particular problem. And of course, by doing that, you'll ideate from the other people, and you'll be better at understanding, okay, the industry is saying this, they're looking at the problem this way, and they're giving that answer. Well, I have a different answer I want to bring, and so that's how I can be unique, different, and original compared to the rest of the industry. So that's essential, and that's about creating better content. But how do you create more content? We've seen that it has an impact on your traffic. It has an impact on your conversion. So all things being equal, you're going to be better if you create 2x the content you did, with the same level of quality. So how do you do that? And how do you do that without spending more? That's the key here. Because of course, if you can recruit more people, if you can put more muscle behind us, then do it. But I'm on the lean content methodology is about how do you do more with less. So 3 ways I want to share with you on how to do that: content curation, repurposing content, and developing contribution and co-creation. So let's go in detail. So the first thing, and that's how we started, and that's how we get successful as a company, is because content curation is a great way to either bootstrap, supplement, or enrich a content production activity. So content curation, raise your hand, those of you who are curating content. Okay. Do you do that for social media? Okay. So most people who do content curation do share content on social media. So I'm not going to go into that. It's great for social media engagement. But I want to talk about the other ways you can leverage other people's content. And the first one is to do what we call curated posts, which is, we've seen a lot of people doing curated content. They curate content, they share that to their social channels, and that's all good. That gives diversity to your Facebook page, your Twitter stream, but it doesn't bring people to your website. What you can do with that content, spending a little bit of extra time, is adding commentary to it, telling your audience why you think that piece of content is interesting. Maybe elaborating or disagreeing even with the author of the original piece. And so you can turn that piece of content into a quote, a backlink to the original source to be ethical and clean. It's not about stealing content. You're not going to duplicate that piece of content, but you're going to enrich it. You're going to elaborate on it. You're going to comment on it, and you're going to turn that into a new piece of content on your blog. And by the way, in the process, you can add, sharing buttons, call to actions, and that brings, not just social traffic back to your website now, but it also brings SEO value. You should Google the Bruce Clay SEO-friendly content curation blog post. There's a lot of explanations there. I'll share some numbers, and it also brings credibility to your editorial line. So that's a great way of supplementing your blog's content very rapidly. Typically, it's a 15-20 minute process versus 3-4 hours for creating original content. The other way you can use curated content is in email newsletters. And it's a great way to do a couple of things. First, make your newsletters more interesting. 2, send them more often. If you're only sending your own content, I'm sure you're kind of limiting yourself in one way or the other in terms of the number of times you send those emails. Because A, if you're only sending your own content, you're limiting yourself with your production capability, but you're also maybe concerned that you're maybe spamming your audience by sending it too much. When you curate content in your newsletters, now you're sending other people's content and you're helping people discover what's interesting in their industry. So does it work? To recap the benefits of curation, the graph here is actually the results of that Bruce Clay experiment I was talking about. they took a piece of original content that was ranking number 4 for a certain keyword. So that was a blog post they had created. They took it down and they replaced it by a curated post. And and they did several forms of curation, but you can see that when they annotated the link with 200 words of their own original commentary, they were surprised to see actually performed better and ended up ranking number 1. And there's the whole credibility aspect, which is on the right, which is that by sharing other people's content, you are being more credible. And don't believe me, don't take my word for it. That's from a study that you can see here from the CMO Council. So what I did here? No? Okay, so the other aspect of it, the second thing I wanna share with you is how to repurpose content over and over again. So you need to think about your content as an investment. Every time you spend time doing content for content marketing, you're investing money, you're investing time, and this should pay off for as long as possible. So there are lots of ways you can reformat, repurpose content. And the goal here is to actually turn something you've already created into a new format that some other people in your audience will be more receptive to. Some people like to go to events. Some people like to read blogs. Some people like to see videos. Some people like to, rush through SlideShare presentations. Everybody's different. If you only do blog, maybe you're missing out some people in your audience who are receptive to other formats. And so you can, play with all of this. Sure.
So just a quick question on this. So I totally hear you on repurposing and people respond differently to different formats. But when I've experienced content repurposed at different websites where it's essentially the same message, just repackaged differently, it feels like it's repetitive. So how can you avoid the redundancy and repetitiveness?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So the question was, are you going to be repeating yourself over and over if you do that? So it's not an alternative to creating content. If you want to do content marketing, you'll have to have that fresh stream of content. But what you can do is you can do a lot more content. Maybe you're investing, for instance, on your blog channel, and all of those blog posts are going to be different. I'm not suggesting you take a blog and you rewrite it to say exactly the same thing. But I'll give you an example of what we did, where we took blog posts, put them together, and created an ebook with the blog posts we had. And some people never download this ebook because they had the content already on the blog, but some people never read our blog and had rather have the ebook so they can read it on the plane or something like that. Now, the other aspect to this question is don't think your audience is looking at your content the same way you are. What I see a lot of people, when you write a blog, you see everything that's on it. You know what you've written. But people don't do that. If you look at your Google Analytics stats, look at the number of people who read more than 5 of your blog posts, 10 of your blog posts. Nobody knows your content the way you do. So we always get a tendency to think, oh my God, I've already said that. I shouldn't repeat myself. Well, the reality is that people didn't hear you. Like 95% of your audience have not seen that one blog post that you might be repurposing in a different format. And the best example of that is that TV and radios have been doing that all the time. They've been repeating exactly the same message. And I'll talk about programming and repeating content as well. Yeah, and there are really 2 aspects to this question. And I'll talk about sharing multiple times your content as well, which is another thing that we recommend you do. Here we're talking about repackaging this content in a new format. So I'll talk about that, and then I'll give you an example on how we've used repurposing and actually contributed content to create a new ebook, and I'll share with you some of the results we've seen. So contribution is another way to create more content without having to spend more time or get more resources. And I'm not gonna go through all of that. I mean, there are, this would be a whole meetup in itself on how you can get people to contribute to your blog. But I wanna share with you some of the things we learned. We've developed a community. If you look at our blog, you'll see that maybe we author maybe a third of our content, and the rest are contributors. And it didn't happen in one day. It's not something where you could say, well, I'm gonna start a contribution program, and so next month I can go on vacation. It doesn't work that fast. It's a long process, but it really pays off. And now we have regular contributors to our blog, and it's really helping us a lot. So we started by identifying authors, influencers, and by the way, the mistake here is to go to the tier 1. We all have those lists of influencers. We tend to focus on the top 10. Those people will never listen to you unless you're an established brand, and probably you don't need that at this point. So start with the, I hate to put people in tiers, but start with people who really need to build their personal brand, who are going to be partnering with you, and you're going to bring them as much as they bring you, and it's going to be a win-win deal. And don't ask them for something yet. Give before you get. Start by sharing their own content. Bring them what they need. We started with authors who were consultants, and we referred clients to them. That's how we started building a relationship. And then once you build that relationship, start with something super easy to ask, like maybe a quote, like give me one sentence on this, and it'll take them 5 minutes, and then they'll be involved in your content. Not only will you create better content, more content through this method, but they'll be involved in sharing it as well. And then you can build your way up to more, to longer contributions. And the other important thing is you have to do marketing of that program as well, in the basic sense. So tell them, what you're going to be doing with that content, where, how frequently you're going to share it. You're asking them to do something for you, and they're expecting a reward, which is visibility. So tell them about all of this. And by the way, we have a great example because Dennis has been a key contributor to our blog and our content, so you can ask him a question on the other side of that program. And so to go back to your question, this is the example I wanted to share with you. It's both an example of co-creation and repurposing. So we've been doing ebooks and white papers for a while, and we had been doing so, and it took a lot of time. We were doing research, we spent hours doing research, interviews, and then writing, rewriting, visual design, blah, blah, blah. And it was really painful. And so at some point we decided, well, why don't we take our top 10, 12 successful blog posts and package them in an ebook, add some contributions like quote and validations from some industry influencers, give them those blog posts to read and say, what do you think of that problem? Can you elaborate on this? And maybe do a bit of rewriting, updating, and everything. And we ended up creating a 90-page ebook. If there's one thing to criticize on that ebook, it was maybe a bit too big, but we want to create a Bible on lean content marketing. It took us actually probably 20% of the time it took our previous ebooks to be created. And you could say, well, okay, but maybe it didn't work that well. And actually, it actually generated slightly more downloads than the previous one. The blue ones are the ones which were 100% original, and the green one is this one. So, it took us 20% of the time for 120% of the results. So this really works, and this shows that people are receptive to a format. And nobody, by the way, nobody complained that, oh my God, I read that blog post already. How dare you send it to me again? Nobody did that. Okay, so we've talked about how to do more/better content. And remember, it's only half of the equation. It's probably the first thing that people struggle with is, I don't have enough content on my blog, or people don't tell me my content is awesome, so surely it must be crap. But that's only half of the problem. So let's look about the other half, which is how do you get more from your content. And I think a lot of people neglect that when there are some relatively easy things that you can do to get more impact from the content you do. So let's look into that. We like peanuts, haven't you noticed? So we want to get more peanuts. And of course, it's about doing that without having to pay for play. The number one thing you can do if you have budget to get more impact from your content is you boost it on Facebook, you boost it on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. Of course, that takes money. But I'm going to talk about how you can do that organically. Again, we're about being lean and efficient. Okay, so 5 things. First, the idea that you need to focus on your content hub. I'll tell you what I mean by that. And a number of you are in social, so I'm going to say, don't share your content. Of course, what I mean is you need to promote it, and I'll explain to you what this means. But I see a lot of people just ending at sharing content, and that's not enough. Getting your team to share your content, and actually not just promoting it, but amplifying it. And I'll tell you about what we mean by why we make a distinction and why it's important. And I'll talk about content marketing automation, which is another way you can leverage the content you have. So the Content Hub thing has been, a very fascinating thing to me. So when you get started with content marketing, and even some established marketers are saying, well, why do I have a blog? Could I just be running my blog on Medium or LinkedIn, or maybe syndicating my content to an industry blog? I mean, it's really hard to get people to my website, but if I publish this on Medium or on LinkedIn, I got all of my followers to see my content. Isn't that a better way to do it? Isn't that a faster way to get an audience? And it's true to some extent that you sign up into Medium, suddenly all of your followers exist. You have followers from day one. You publish something, they'll see it. Same thing on LinkedIn. You don't have any setup and maintenance, or you don't have to fight with an IT department to change whatever you want to change on your blog. But there is this slide, which is, this story is very similar to the story we heard a few years ago about Facebook telling us, hey guys, you don't need a website anymore because you can do everything with Facebook pages. And some of you might have done that, and to me, I was really tempted to believe that story. This is a chart that Jay Bear, another great influencer in content marketing, put together. The line is the average organic reach of Facebook pages, and you can see it's been doing one thing and one thing only. It's been going down, and I'm sure you all see it. When we had 12 likes on a post a year ago, now we have 6. And if we had 50 likes, we have 25, and same thing for the clicks and everything. And at the same time, the valuation of Facebook has been going up. And what's their model? It's advertising. So, organic reach is declining, and Facebook is telling you, oh, but it's okay because you can boost your content and pay me ad money for that. So, when you build on other people's platform, you create a dependency. And, so there are other aspects to this. First, long term, you might be trapped the way people who gave up on their website and put everything on their Facebook page are. You're dependent on paying advertising on pay for play. But there's also no brand recognition like there is on your own website. There is no call to action that you can really design and make very compelling like you can on your website. And there's no SEO, so you don't get this long-term, long-tail source of traffic that Google brings you. So what I mean by a content hub is, and maybe it's trivial for you guys, but we see a lot of people say, well, no, I'm going to do my blog somewhere else. Think about all of your content being in a home base, a content hub that's on your website. All of your blog posts, all of your videos, all of your multimedia content. And think of social as a great way to distribute that content. And it might be okay to syndicate initially and to bootstrap with LinkedIn and Medium, but eventually you want to create this relationship with your brand on your website. And you want to get people to take action. Because remember, with the definition, if you agree with my definition of content marketing, it's all about taking action. So this orange box here, whether it's through forms or landing pages, or it's really important because that's what you want. Otherwise, you're just doing content for content's sake. So I said this, and we talked about repurposing. Repurposing is creating something new, but I would go a step further and say your content needs to be shared several times. If you share it only once, because of that organic reach curve that I just showed, and by the way, let me go back here for a second. You see the person here, we have that's in February. Right now people say it's 2%. So if you share your content only once, and whether it's 5% or 2%, it's not a lot. So if you share your content only once on social networks, so you create a blog post, you share it on Facebook, and then you tweet it, and then you put it on Google+, and you do that only once, you're reaching 5% or 2% of your followers. In other words, you're living at 95, 98% of the people who decided to follow you. So you're leaving a lot of audience and visibility on the table. So that's an experiment that Mark Trappigans did, sharing a first time, looking at what it did in his Google Analytics, sharing a second time, sharing a third time, sharing a fourth time. And of course, every time he does that, he's getting a spike of traffic. So you should share each new piece of content multiple times on all of your channels. And as Susan mentioned, you don't have to do that bluntly, and you can vary the message and all of that. You can vary the picture, but don't think people have read it because you've just shared it or published it once. The other aspect of it is, if brands are going to be destroyed in terms of organic reach by all the social networks because they all have one thing in common, they sell ads, then it becomes essential to get real people to share your content. So it's about getting your team to share your content. And, I said I'm an engineer, so there are some numbers here, and you guys can do the math. And actually, I didn't put that slide together. But if you have 1 million fans on a Facebook page, you would think it's better than having 135 people sharing your content. Well, as a matter of fact, it's the same thing. So if you have 1 million fans and you get 1.5% reach, that's 15,000 people reach. And if you have 135 advocates, even though they'll have on average 300 plus friends, their reach is going to be a lot higher. And so whether you have 1 million fans or you have 10,000 fans, look at how many people are in your team or in your stakeholder group that you could get to share your content, and do a similar calculation. You're probably better off finding a way to get them to share your content. And I'm not going to go into how do you get that done, but there's a blog post we have on our blog where we give tips on that. So I talk about promoting, but promoting actually is not even enough. So we did some analysis looking at a number of blog posts, looking at our software helps with a lot of the things I mentioned, but it does something that is really important to this, is it gets you analytics. So to me, promotion is something you should do with each and every blog post. You've spent some time creating that content, you should promote it. But then, as you measure its performance, you'll see that no matter how predictable you try to be, no matter how well you've been doing research and strategy, some content will perform, some content will not perform. So the question is, what can you do with the top 20, 30, 40% of content that performs? Well, so here's what happens on that graph. This is a graph that shows the bars here are the number of times you've been sharing the content on the different channels. And so you can see that initially the post was published, and then it was shared intensely, and then after 2 weeks it stopped. What happens after 2 weeks? Traffic or lead generation, which are the blue and the red curves, start to plateau. So you've invested in something, you've done what you could to launch it, but then it stopped producing results. So your investment is now not producing any more results. Well, how about what if this is a piece of evergreen content that is still good? Can you say that everything you published last year is not relevant anymore today? It probably still is relevant. It's probably a lot of content you published in 2015 where you've been educational, informative, or engaging or fun, that's still relevant today. And so here's what happens when you keep doing the promotion work. And of course, you're not going to do it with the same intensity. But here's what happens when you start adding those bars on the right side. So in this second case, there's some promotion, which is pretty intense at the beginning for 1 or 2 weeks. And then because the post is good, because it's converting well, because it's engaging to the audience, we keep sharing it for forever. I mean, there's really no reason to stop it. And let's say we share it until it stops being relevant. And you can see that it has a direct impact on the two curves, which are, getting people to take action. So if you can identify the posts which are which deserve to be amplified this way, you can really make a difference. We're talking about moving from 600 views to 2,400. So we're talking about 4x more traffic or leads or whatever metric you want to use. I mean, 4x without creating more content. So that has a big impact. So the other thing is, and that's kind of the recap I want to give you, is all of those things, or most of those things, are things that are, can seem trivial. But what we found is that in our research, a lot of marketers were not doing them. Not because they didn't think that, it made sense. There are some objections here and there about, am I going to create some fatigue if I share too much? Am I going to have the same value if I curate versus I create? But a lot of people are actually convinced that those are best practices, but they can't find a system, a way to do all of that, because some of those things are really time consuming. Like if I go back to the slide, and if you look at all of those bars, I mean, all of those points on the bars are a share on Twitter, Facebook, or some social network, or LinkedIn. It takes time. And same thing with curation. Curation is not, is a very time-consuming process if you don't automate a part of that process. So a lot of the reasons we found in our study, we have something you can check out, which is called the Content Marketing ROI Grader. It's a self-serve interactive piece of content where it takes you 5 minutes and you can grade your content marketing practices. And so I think we now had 3,000 people take the test. So we have some pretty good data on how those best practices, which seem to be simple, are being applied by experienced marketers. And we found that only 25-30% of them apply those best practices. And they tell us it's because they lack the time to implement them. They make sense. They're not stupid. They know they can get more traffic, more impact if they do some of those things. But they don't do them because they fail to have the time. So automating is an essential piece of the equation. You can automate all of those things. So content discovery, which will help you with ideation, curation, that can be automated. That's actually how we got started. Keyword research and discovery. There are great tools out there. You can input your own keywords. They'll give you other keyword suggestions of keywords you might want to use. There's more and more technology now that can do real-time content audits. A content audit, who in the room is doing regular content audits? Who's going through all of your content library to find out what you're missing, how your content is performing? Yeah? Okay. So there is technology out there now that can automate this and do that on real time for you. So scan all of your content library, look at the performance metrics, and identify those posts which you might be that might deserve to be reshared again. Well, our own tool, if you want me to plug. But Compost has also if you Google Compost audit, you'll find that. And if you check on our blog within 2 weeks, we'll be sharing some other tools there. Social media distribution and not just sharing, as I mentioned. So all the scheduling, the programming, there are lots of tools that you can use in that that will help you not just share content once, but apply a schedule to your content. So if you want tool names, there are Buffer, Hootsuite, and we do that too. We kind of do all of that. So, but I don't want to plug our product too much. But you should really find out what works best for you in terms of being able to do the scheduling and the programming of that content. Email newsletter creation. I talked about the power of curated email newsletters. A lot of people are still not sending newsletters because they're telling us, well, it takes me 2-3 hours to do a newsletter, to format it and everything. That can be automated as well. Analytics, performance measurements, all of that should and can be automated so that you can identify the successful content that deserves to be amplified. And by the way, this amplification I described is fully organic, but think of it if you have, some budget to add, to do a bit of pay for play, even though I said, everything I presented here doesn't require any budget. It doesn't hurt if you're adding budget to that. You've identified the posts which are the solid ones, the top performing piece of content. You can mix organic and paid amplification. So that's what I wanted to share with you tonight. And to recap, I think if you're came to this meetup thinking, hey, I need to get better with content marketing. I struggle with engagement, with reach, with finding the time to create more content. First, you're not the only one. Our approach to this has been to go really, reconstruct, re-engineer the content marketing methodology. Again, think of it as more/better content and more from your content. And those are the best practices that we found have been the most successful ones for a lot of marketers. And they're really, most of the things are really easy to automate. So consider content marketing automation as well. I've been going quickly through all of those best practices. So I want to save time for Q&A, but there's lots of those things which are on our blog. And our blog will lead you to ebooks, resources. If you don't like blog articles and you'd rather see webinars or videos or download ebooks, we do apply those best practices ourselves. So check out our blog at blog.scoop.it. Thank you, and I hope we have time for a few questions.
And I just want to reiterate that that blog post that you were saying that you were going to release soon, if you want to share it with those OCTribe hashtag, the group that's following, if there's a lot of people on that hashtag, they'll see it too. And if you want to send it
Okay.
to me, I can send out the Meetup group, you can post it on our Facebook group as well.
I will.
So this is where I think you should use that mic, and I'll run this mic. There's the mic line. We have 7 people on the live stream, so this isn't for no reason.
Could you go over again what the difference is between sharing and promoting and amplifying?
Yeah. So sharing is what we see a lot of people do. They are creating a piece of content and they click publish and then they share it once. So they'll tweet it, they'll put it on their Facebook page, they'll put it on LinkedIn, and then they'll move to something else. And again, that means that only 2-5% of each of your followers on those channels will see it. So promoting is actually do that repeatedly and give it a different schedule. So for instance, if you've tweeted it in the morning, maybe you want to tweet it at night because people are receptive at different times. So it's actually maybe sharing it 10, 12 times over the next 2-3 weeks. And maybe changing the message, the picture here and there so that you don't sound too repetitive. And again, tools will help you find the right balance in this. But that is what I call promotion. And that kind of promotion is something you do before you even know if your content is going to be successful. But after those 2 weeks, you'll start getting statistics and analytics on whether this piece of content is worth spending more time distributing on. And then you can start doing that again and again and again. It doesn't work if this is a blog post promoting an event, of course. It works if it's evergreen content that has been converting. Why are those the two essential criteria? Well, if it's not evergreen, it doesn't make sense to reshare it over and over again. But second, it also needs to be performing because you want to focus this effort on the top 20, top 30% of your content. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and then what is amplifying?
So again, sharing once, promoting sharing 10 or 12 times within the next 2 weeks before you know if it even works. And then if it works, once you've measured the impact, that's when you start amplification.
But I guess what he's asking is, what is the difference in the actual tactical process of amplifying versus, is it providing context or your own opinion on it?
So that's a good question. In the way we do it, there's a part which is common and there's a part which is not common. The part which is common is the sharing on social channels. The part which might not be common is maybe you want to do some outreach to some influencers. Like for instance, I have some influencers I created a relationship with that if I ask them to share a piece of content, they'll do it. But I'm not going to ask them to share every single piece of content on our blog because we blog too much. So I'm going to do that only when I know this is a real good piece of content and I've measured its impacting. So think of it of all the things you can do around content distribution that are costly, time-consuming, so you can't do them for all of your posts. And it can even go, as I said, to spending $500 on Facebook to promote a post. You're going to be much better off spending those $500 on one single post that you know works really, really well than spreading it out on 10 different posts. Did I answer your question? Yeah, great. Cool.
You had mentioned keyword discovery tools. I was wondering, I think somebody else asked for audit tools, but did you have anything like off the top of your head that you recommend for keyword discovery?
Yeah, there's a tool which is called is that keyword.io or? I'll find out for you, but it's a tool where you can put all of your keywords, and what they'll send you, what they'll give you is, when you type in Google something, Google will try to guess what you're typing, and at the bottom they'll say you, okay, people also search for this, this, and that. This tool will give you this, this, and that. So if you have so if you think of your keywords being, a list of 10 keywords, you'll end up with 200 keywords.
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
I'll find out the name and I'll tweet it.
If you could tweet it out with
Yeah.
the OCTribe, we'd all be able to see it. That would be awesome. Thank you.
And if you're, I don't know if some of you guys use HubSpot, but HubSpot is a similar tool built in the platform as well.
Okay, this one is from Mark on the Twitter chat.
He's watching the live stream.
Yeah, he's watching the live stream.
Yeah, we have people watching the live stream.
That's actually, that's him up there, but
Yeah.
that's not his
But
question.
there's
So.
Hi, Mark.
There are 7 people on the live stream.
So he says, can you please speak to the role of A/B testing in content marketing?
Interesting. So it's interesting because we do a lot of A/B testing ourselves on the product as a startup who does a product. We haven't done a lot of A/B testing on content, and I found it hard to really do some A/B tests. There's a bit of A/B testing you can do. For instance, when you send an email newsletter, you can A/B test subject line A versus subject line B and see what performs the best. There's been also some people who BuzzFeed and others who've been known to do extensive testing and all of that. I find it hard to apply myself because when you're going to write a piece of content, you're not going to write an A version and a B version. Not if you're trying to be lean the way we are. You're going to create one version. So there's limited aspects of A/B testing that I've found useful. But if you guys in the room have done some A/B tests, I'd love to hear it, and I'm sure Mark would love to hear it. I mean, beyond doing basic stuff like trying subject line A versus subject line B, and of course the equivalent of that on social media. If you're going to share your content multiple times, one of the things going back to this, sharing, promoting, amplifying content, if you're going to be promoting, you could say, well, I'm going to promote that post 10 times. So you could have maybe 3 different tweets for the same content, and one of them might be performing better, and so that might be the message you use then when you amplify your content down the road. But besides of that, I haven't found really huge wins from A/B testing.
Just a quick comment on the A/B testing. What I have seen a lot is testing around the layout of an article, for example. So it's not the body of content, as it were, but how it's architected and the bare bones skeletons of the content. Does the visual come first and then the headline, or how can you switch up that order? Because to your point, you're not going to recreate the entire content of an article, for example.
Yeah. I mean, it's beyond, to me, it's a little bit beyond content marketing as well, but landing pages testing, we do that as well. So if we have an ebook that's gated behind a landing page, we'll of course A/B test the landing page, and tools like Unbounce, for instance, are great to do that.
What is the name of the tool?
Unbounce.
Unbounce?
Yeah, it allows you to build landing pages without coding. So if you guys are doing any form of gated content, you want to put an ebook or a white paper behind a form so people fill it in, check it out. I think they have even a free plan, or it's free to try, and it's really affordable. So.
Other questions?
Yeah, HubSpot also has that. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Julie is our marketing director, and she's a big HubSpot fan. So. Oh, you do that.
Questions from the 8. Now, I just saw 8 people in the live stream. Are there any questions from there? You're monitoring. Yeah. Other questions in the room? All right. Oh, yes.
Thank you. So I'm trying to bootstrap a new developer community. It does not exist today, and I'm hoping to go live. And I've been trying to put together a content calendar. Do you have any sense of, I'm looking at short form video and blogs and then promoting through Twitter and Google Plus and that kind of thing. Do you have any sense of what types of content are doing better with different kinds of audiences?
So the answer is no, and I would refrain from believing people who will give you an answer to that question. Okay. Because so I think it depends on a number of things. So let me give you an example. Like, some people will say, oh my God, I've done a podcast, and I do a podcast for people who are in the healthcare company, and it works like a charm. But you don't know whether it works like a charm because they're really good at podcasting, or whether that's what the audience is receptive to, and it could be a combination of both. So my own answer to that is, start with a content format that you feel confident with, that you feel that's gonna help you. That first of all you feel motivated by doing, because that's important. Being consistent is, by the way, the number one criteria for success. Content marketing takes time, so if you are exhausted after 2 weeks of podcasting, then you're never gonna succeed. So find a content format that you feel motivated by, try it. And it's also need to be a content format that you can easily measure the impact of. At the end of the day, when, most of the time, I would say 70% of the time, when people apply those criteria, they end up blogging. And to me, it's not a surprise, because it's easy to set up. It's easy to measure. You have lots of analytics tools. You can put Google Analytics. It's free. And, everybody knows how to write. And so, so I recommend blogging. If I have to give an answer, I'd say blogging. If you put a gun to my head, but most of the time I'd say no. Try it and start with something you like and experiment with it.
Okay, thank you.
Back to the audit tool real quick. Does it work with technical content? In other words, a medical community writing highly technical medical articles.
Yeah, I mean, so an audit wouldn't be looking at what's in the content, or whether the content is well written from a human reader would do. It's looking at what it did in terms of performance metrics. Auditing your content is looking at if you do a full content audit, you can go very, very deep in this, but I think the basics of a content audit is listing all of your content, looking at the performance, like how much traffic, how much conversions you had from this piece of content, and saying, well, maybe we've done, 50 blog posts, and some of them performed well, some of them performed average, and some of them didn't really work well. And then you can start identifying reasons of that, and improve by understanding what failed. But you can also take the stuff that works and leverage it better, as I explained.
No, I get that. Maybe I misunderstood. Would the content audit tools give you back subject areas that you're missing?
So at this point, I don't know any tools that would do that automatically. But I think that's kind of that's some of the things we're looking at. Is we're working on artificial intelligence and semantic analysis to do that. At the moment, we don't do that. I don't know of any tool that does that and that would tell you, okay, those 50 pieces of content, they are too much top of the funnel, or they are too much on that topic and not enough on that topic. The tool that I mentioned by Compost would let you tag those pieces of content, and at the end of the tagging, you'll realize that 90% of my content is on that topic and only 10% is on that topic, but you have to do it manually. Eventually, that's a very good point. Eventually, I hope we'll build technology that does that automatically.
Okay, thank you.
Hey there. I'm actually going back to the content question when she was asking what types of content get followed up, and your answer was great in that focus on what you're efficient at, what you're good at, and what resonates well with your audience. But my question is, is there any metrics or findings about diversifying the content you have? Like if you find your audience prefers one type of content and that happens to be what you're good at, is it good to still give out other types of content just so it's not the same type of content messaging?
Yeah, and that's the whole idea behind repurposing. The question really usually becomes like, can you afford to do that? Of course, in an ideal world, you'd want to be having the best YouTube or Vimeo channel, the best SlideShare channel, the best blog, and all of that. In reality, most small marketing teams are struggling with this, and so the idea of repurposing content becomes interesting. At some point, an experiment we did is, for instance, we took some of our most successful blog posts and turned them into SlideShares, which doesn't sound trivial, but I figured like the way we wrote our blog posts is like one paragraph, one idea, and if I can take this idea, make that the title, and I put a visual, a lot of people will still get it without having to have the full paragraph. So, it was a matter of, it took a bit of time. It was not 100% repurposing, but we took a blog post that had maybe, 10 different paragraphs, and it was about sourcing 10 images that represented those paragraphs. And so we did that, and it was, a marginal investment compared to, it took us maybe, 1 hour after spending 4 hours doing a blog post. So, the answer is yes. I think diversifying works well. The question is, can you afford it? And thinking about way to repurpose the content you have to do that. I think it's pretty good. I've seen other people say, well, I do a blog post and then I do a podcast, or vice versa, or doing a podcast and doing a transcript and making that a blog post. So that again, they're thinking about what is the marginal effort I can do to do this diversification.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. I wondered if you can recommend any brands that are really good at content marketing?
Yeah, well, big brands or small brands or?
Kind of, I'm interested, I can think of a lot of B2B brands that are good, but B2C I'm not so sure, so maybe consumer-facing brands.
So I'd say B2C, but it's, it's kind of the opposite of my presentation. I would say, to me, the gold standard in content marketing is Red Bull. But, it's, to me, what they're doing is fantastic. They transformed their company into a media company that monetizes with soft drinks. They have, if you look at the Red Bull content pool, they have more than 50,000 videos and images of, people doing crazy stuff. And it's probably, even for Fortune 500 companies, it's probably out of reach of 97% of them because it's really a strategic shift. But to me, that's a great example. You know, I'm sure we've all been consuming Red Bull content, and we know the brand and all of that. And I mean, remember, those guys are competing with Coca-Cola. I mean, that's who they're competing with. And if you look at their numbers, and I mean, they're way, way smaller, and they've been around for a much shorter time, but they are a worldwide brand because of content.
So this is a follow-up from Mark on Twitter.
Mark was not happy with my answer.
Well, so he says, for sure subject line AB, but what about testing different pictures?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you can do that. Did we do that? Yeah, did we see people doing that? Yeah. I guess you probably can. So I'm gonna take my engineer hat there. A/B testing, if you're looking at the, he's here. Okay. Mark, are you an engineer? Okay. So the problem with A/B testing is that A/B tests are usually easy to design, but not easy to conclude from. Like, for instance, if you do a picture of a blog post and you share it in the morning, and then you share with a different picture at night, and you get a better click rate in the morning, is it because it was in the morning, or whether it was because it was at night? I mean, if you do A/B tests and you're not doing significant threshold analysis, and I don't want to go into the math of that, but there are tools to do that. But if you're doing an A/B test and saying, okay, I got more click rates in A than B, and you didn't do a test, then you're probably better off not doing any tests. And so, I don't know, maybe it makes me want to try it. So Mark, I'll try and I'll come back and tell you.
We have time for one more question in the room. Anyone else? No? Okay.
You put a lot of pressure on them. So
no, I know. The best question. The smartest question. So don't forget that we have 2 people from Salesforce here who want to ask you a few questions and pick your brain and maybe give you some money. And so talk to them. They have an iPad. Next month, we will be having some digital storytelling type community content, telling stories around your community. Do we have anyone from, I forgot the company's name. So do we have, yes, here he is, right here, sorry.
So I'm with Measure Twice. We're a video, animation, and motion content company. And we were going to, and actually this presentation leads into it perfectly, because we were trying to hit on why to develop content, and you did it way better than we could have. So that's great. So we're going to do a little bit more just on storytelling and how to get the most from storytelling, most from the footage you already done, repurposing, same sort of ideas, but how you can use motion content in different ways to give different looks on the same, pieces of content that you have, sizzles, animation, all that sort of. And then, of course, using story to promote your connect to your audience better.
Measure Twice in September, blame it on the wine for me not remembering the name of the content. The company, there you go. We have a social media manager job at TechSoup, do not forget that. Other than that, thank you, Scoop.it. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Guillaume. And follow the hashtag, and we will be posting a Storyfy, and we'll be notifying you guys via the hashtag. And, one other thing. In October, we have a party sponsored by Salesforce Community Cloud in partnership with us and CMX. And it's just totally social, drinking, having fun, dancing, eating great food on the 4th of October between 5 and 7 p.m. And it will be at Galvanize. So I hope to see you all there. I'll remind you many, many times. And then October 26th meetup, there's a panel with Salesforce and some customers of Salesforce talking about community best practices. Other than that, thank you very much. Have a great evening. Good night.